I can freely say that I've lost long since all faith in politics and politicians to lead us to better days. If I'm right and the politicians are a lost cause, who can help us find a way, the way? With that in mind, I look for ideas and opinions in other places from other people. My first guest, ready to contemplate the developing hellscape in the Middle East, is evolutionary biologist Bret Weinstein. Bret joins me now, I hope. Are you there, Bret?
I'm here. It's very good to be with you, Neil.
Good evening, sir. Good to see you. Now, Bret, you've spent your career studying, among others, the human species. Is humankind at a crossroads, or indeed on the edge of a precipice right now?
Unquestionably, and I think there's something about the current crisis in the Middle East that makes it particularly hard to see. There's one layer of this crisis that is absolutely perfectly clear. The perpetrators of the crime, Hamas, is simply guilty of a notorious violation, a deliberately barbaric attack against people who are absolutely innocent. But the clarity of that layer is obscuring a higher set of patterns that we must be paying attention to. And I will try to put it in context. You jump in and ask questions if they're necessary. There are two evolutionary reasons that people cooperate, and really this could be true for any creature. One of those reasons is because of shared genes. The other reason is because of reciprocity and the fact that one can profit by partnering with other individuals who bring something valuable to the table. Society can be based on either of these, but for almost the entirety of human history, lineage against lineage competition was the reason for people to group in the way that they did. That has given way to a different mode of collaboration very late in history, the Cosmopolitan West. In the Cosmopolitan West, although we've never achieved it perfectly, we aspire to put our genetic relatedness aside and collaborate with those who are ready to collaborate with us. And the world is caught in a tension between these two modes. The problem is that in good times, this mode of collaboration, the Cosmopolitan West and the reciprocity that it depends on, functions very well. It makes a safer, fairer, more enlightened world. It's one that anyone would desire if they could see the comparison. But the problem is that as times turn to be not so good, it collapses into the much more stable lineage against lineage displacement. And that's where we are. And unfortunately, the Middle East is a flashpoint where this tension is especially likely to kick over into the lineage versus lineage mode and to drag the rest of the world along with it. Something from which I think we might not emerge.
If I can jump in there, Bret, it seems to me, and I'm sure it seems to you and others, that we are much too dangerous to each other now. You know, you're talking about times in the past, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, where the threat we posed to one another at the existential level was limited by hardware and the rest of it. But as things are right now, too many of us in the different groups have too much potential to create global catastrophe. We can't let that, we can't allow those forces to be unleashed against one another.
That's absolutely right. Human groups have driven each other extinct previously, but the way the Earth is currently configured, we are so interdependent, there are so many of us, the systems on which we depend are so complex, and the weaponry we have at our disposal is so ferocious that historical pattern of lineage versus lineage displacement will not only be a tragedy, but it threatens to drive our species to extinction.
Bret, I have guests in the studio with me. Tonya, you listen to that, yes. And it forces you to sort of pull back and look at the whole situation from a different perspective. You know, how do you feel hearing an evolutionary biologist suggest that we're in danger of wiping each other out?
But I feel that now anyway. I feel that's what's going on. But the question is how do we stop that from happening? Because that lineage, that kind of tribalism that we have, you're right, we've just resorted straight back to it. How do we stop ourselves from doing that? Because I think that those that are manipulating us from up above are doing this on purpose, because we're much more controllable when we're in these little groups of our own. So what I would like to know, the question is, how do we stop this from happening? What can we do?
Bret, from an evolutionary biologist's point of view, where do the answers lie?
Well, I think there are two patterns that we need to pay attention to. One is that there have been many experiments with this cosmopolitan reciprocity structure for society, including in the Middle East. There have been experiments with this in Turkey. There have been experiments in Iran, in Iraq. Israel certainly has one foot very solidly in the modern West, and I believe a majority of Israelis aspire to join the modern West fully. So these experiments have to be protected and fostered when they arise. And then the other thing to pay attention to is what causes that mode, that superior mode of civilization to break down is scarcity. And the reason that we have scarcity has to do with the way resources are hoarded by certain factions. So when you talk about people who may have an interest in us battling, the reason to do it is so that they do not lose power and they are capable of taking more of their share of resources. So in effect, they have absorbed the abundance that might cause the entire world to default into this better mode.
Are there lessons to be learned from the way things have unfolded over the last 3 years? For example, I would say that Israel, the people of Israel, experienced some of the most draconian conditions during the COVID adventure you compared to any other country in the world. Are there lessons about a direction of travel in the way in which populations are being used and even misused by their own governments?
I think there is a very powerful, if difficult to accept, lesson. We can see in what the Israeli government did to the Israeli population over COVID, and what we saw in many other parts of the world, that our leaders are not necessarily on our side, and that means that at the point that we are called to wave particular flags, we may be at cross purposes with ourselves. It is truly the case that for the population of the world, this superior cosmopolitan Western approach to collaborating with each other would provide a higher quality of life. It would make us all richer. And the question is, if those who have power over us have a contrary interest because they wish to take more than their share, then we are at some level going to have to confront them. But what we've seen following the events of October 7th in Israel is that the coalition, as you described in your monologue, coalition that was forming in the aftermath of COVID as the scales had fallen from our collective eyes has been fragmented, and it almost feels deliberate. That this particular issue was going to take a group of people who had learned to speak to each other, and it is going to make it impossible for them to recognize each other as fellows anymore, and that is a disaster.
Bret Weinstein, evolutionary biologist. I'm sorry, time is against me. I've run out of time with you, but thank you so much for a completely different take on the situation. Thanks for bringing that to us this evening, and I'll hope to have the opportunity to pick up this conversation with you again in the future. Thank you, Bret Weinstein.
Always a pleasure.
Greg, you listened to that. You're an American citizen, and how do you feel contemplating your nation being pulled into another dreadful conflagration?
This could be a disaster if you look at it specifically, because we're not ready, frankly. And the role of government is to defend their citizens and to look after their currency. Just to maintain the currency. It's not meant to run the economy or manage the economy or tell children they can't go to school or tell people they can't run their business or wear a mask or get a vaccine. That's not the role of government. But what's happened with the Justin Trudeaus and the Joe Bidens of the world, and guilty here as well in the UK, where we found ourselves going to a believe it or not, a blue state in America to get away from the draconian lockdowns here. Now, that's a sad state of affairs. At least in America, we have the federalist system, so you could have free states and not so free states. So the point is, the government, both in Israel and in the U.S. and Canada and the UK, they failed to stick to those two major things. Protect your citizens, meaning have a military that is a deterrent to evil, and maintain the currency. But instead, they wrecked the currency, Canada, US, UK. They wrecked the currency. Guess who suffers from that? Not me. It's people that work and that actually drive to work and have to earn a living. Real wages went down 24 months in a row. So they're paying for it. So wear your mask. Your kids are not learning. Don't go to work. And then even when it came back, they wrecked the country. So they're ruining the lives of the people. And yet they're not defending the borders. They're not looking. So that's why we have this situation. There's no deterrence.